everyone, my name is Dessa, aka Writing from the Shadows,
I'm Rika, aka Vestigial Claws.
and welcome to
Work in Progress.
For our third episode, we dove into chapter 4 of the story. So let's just dive on into it.
Sounds good. So very basic recap. We've had sort of 3 chapters of setting the stage. We've gotten exposition, we've gotten world building. We sort of know what's going on, who the players are. I keep wanting to call it episode 4, and I think there's a reason for it. It's because your writing tends to be, it sort of follows a formula in a way that I think would translate very well to film. So reading it occasionally for me is sort of feeling like an episode.
Okay.
But this is the first time that we're really getting to see Dazai and Chuya really get to know each other. The wedding was all appearances, but now we're getting some snark, and we're also getting a little bit more deep dive into what the two of them are going to be like. So to start out with, we have the Mori Dazai conversation.
Yes.
Can you talk about how you created the beautiful air of unease throughout that entire passage? Because I read it and felt slimy the whole time. And that's very, like, that like, evoked a physical reaction of, from me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me when we're talking about Mori, and as I've mentioned in the previous episodes, this is the most I've written Mori for one of these chapter stories. It's kind of just this, as I mentioned last week, like everything's okay, but. And so when we start the chapter and we start with the first scene with the offices of the Mori Corporation, we kind of build it up so that it's this normal organization on the outside, except there's like some people missing fingers, except their tattoos, except these people won't look Dazai in the eye. So you kind of build this atmosphere before we see Mori. And then you get into Mori's office, and it's an office, it's a penthouse, and then you just have like this little kid coloring on the floor. And so there's just all of these, just like, you just want to take that slight twist and make it a little weird. And that's one aspect of it, but then also just the fact that Mori goes straight into an interrogation. I would say, the first thing he says is, "I hope I didn't call you from a warm bed." Like, Mori's not playing around. He's like, we're getting straight to the bottom of this right away. And also the fact that his first comment was like, "So did you fuck?" That's a little slimy as well. So it's just kind of
A little bit.
taking where you have normal societal conventions. Mori doesn't adhere to those. He doesn't have to adhere to those. He's too powerful to really deal with them. And so it's that, and then also the aspect of the fact that Dazai is uncomfortable. Really, because we know Dazai and we know he's confident and we know he's competent. When he feels uneasy, the reader kind of feels uneasy.
Do you think that it's easier to play into that sense with Dazai in particular, because most people reading this fic are coming in with the preconceived character notions from canon, and one of the main themes being that Dazai is always in control of a situation. Is that something that you've found you've enjoyed kind of flipping on its head? Because thus far in canon, we've seen small things of Dazai surprised and of Dazai caught off guard, but he always has a path back. We don't actually see him for extended periods of time out of his element. So was that fun to kind of conceptualize?
I wouldn't say necessarily that there was like much of a thought experiment to it, because we don't see in canon, we don't see a whole bunch of Dazai under Mori in canon. We got a little bit in season 3 with 15. We get a little bit of it with Dark Era, a little bit with some of where the manga is going and that sort of thing. But we don't see a lot of like, what does Dazai look like when he's Mori's subordinate? What we do know is that Mori's still in charge in the Port Mafia. And there is this man sitting at the top of the tower that Dazai, our famous strategist, the guy that always has it going on, is not touching. So there's a power dynamic there that we don't really get to explore in canon. So really, this was just me going, well, what was it probably like in the Dark Era when he was, had to listen to this guy and had to say, "Yes, sir," and "Yes, boss," and "You're in charge."
Seeing Dazai's internal monologue through that was actually very interesting. You did say that Dazai was going to start showing his character a little bit more to Chuya and to the readers, and I am seeing that, and it's interesting that the first identifiable emotion that I've really gotten from Dazai, I think, is like contempt,
Mm.
distaste,
Mm-hmm.
a little flash of anger. It's interesting that that is the first feeling, despite everything that's happened so far, and despite the fact that the introductory chapters included a decent amount of Dazai's point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but to contrast that, we've seen Chuya go through a lot of emotions so far. We've
Yeah.
seen them in kind of short spans. He seems like he compartmentalizes pretty well. That makes sense for the narrative. But we've seen Chuya emote a lot. And so is that something that balancing the contrast, having them be foils to each other, I'm assuming that's going to continue, but are there any things there that are going to be kind of surprising or twisty with any of that?
In terms of their emotions and how they're presenting,
Yes.
I do. Yes, there's going to be a little bit of a twist. There's going to be a little bit of a couple of surprises in terms of the emotions. What I kind of do with most of my stories, but with this one as well, is we kind of go into fan fiction with this preconceived notion of the dynamic and the characters. And kind of a very popular fanon perception of the Sokoku dynamic is Chuya's a hothead. We see him losing his temper a lot. And how often do we see Dazai have a genuine emotion? Next to never. And so you come in and that's your expectation. But when we're talking about characterization and we're talking about making well-rounded people, Dazai has emotions. And so if Dazai has emotions and Dazai's not showing emotions, how is he processing them? And it's kind of that journey that we're going through as we start to get to learn Dazai more. Is, can we tell when he's actually having emotion and trying to hide it? Is there an instance where he's not going to be able to hold back the emotion? What does Dazai with a really strong emotional experience act like? Because really the example we've seen is with the Dark Era and with Oda, and he lost his cool. So it's definitely possible, and that's something that I always like to play with. Kind of my approach to pretty much all of my Sokoku stories is Dazai's not Mary suing this. I'm cutting him down a little bit. When I wrote my first story for the fandom, Illustrations of Lying, I actually got a lot of commentary on it because they're like, it's kind of weird that you had Dazai make this really big mistake. They're like, I don't know if I buy this. I don't know if I buy it. I'm like, no, he's making this mistake. And just the reason that I'm a big proponent of like Dazai can fuck up and he can fuck up catastrophically is a little bit from, I'm sorry to bring this up, but the Harry Potter series, we all know we have feelings about Joanne. They're not great feelings, but it was also a masterclass in writing and in characterization. And in particular with Albus Dumbledore, I want to say the first or second book, he says something about like, being a cleverer man than most, my mistakes are usually more grievous. And that's kind of where I come in from Dazai's perspective.
That would make sense given that Dazai is such a clever man and he's meddling on such large scales. When he fucks up, repercussions.
Yeah,
are we allowed to curse on this?
Yeah, I've cursed like 10 times.
I'm like, have I been cursing on his podcast? I don't know if this is G-rated.
We're not trying to monetize it, so it doesn't matter.
Thank God.
Fuck you, YouTube.
Thanks. So...
Sorry, that was a really good cup of tea. I just made, for the people only listening to the audio, I just made this really, like, thoughtful, appreciative face at my sip of tea. It was delicious.
There was a whole process of emotions there that we just went through. That was a journey. So I'm also a little bit, I don't think curious is the word. Higuchi is a canon character that is used as canon fodder, and also, in my opinion, there are some very questionable characterization choices, specifically in regards to her temperament in the Mafia. Yeah. The way the show handled this in the manga is we got the whole Higuchi episode exploring her reasons why and her determination. Are those things that are going to carry over to your Higuchi, or would those be detrimental in your world?
really my rule of thumb is I'm always writing a person. So there are aspects of Higuchi's characterization in canon that are very much over the top, in my opinion, that kind of turn her into more of a caricature than a character.
I agree.
And so that's something I always stay away from. So whenever we're looking at a character in canon that's more of a caricature, I'm going to be doing things to ground them. And Higuchi is a character you'll see more of throughout the story, so you'll get a feel for that as well.
I'm very interested to see what you do with her. I also, I have to know this. I know something that the listeners don't know, or might know if they follow your Twitter closely enough, but I know that you love Gin Akutagawa. Are we going to see more of her this story? And you briefly touched on the sibling bond between her and Aku as a way to show Dazai's control over him. Is that going to come into play later? And is it going to be something... Like, I want to see how you're going to explore the sibling bond if you are going in that direction, and if you're not, can you talk about how you would have?
We are going to see more of Gin, and we are going to see how the siblings interact. This story... more than I would say in my last 2 chapter fics for the fandom. It really is a more of a cast of characters than just Sokoku. So right now, as we're building up the relationship and that sort of thing, it is very heavily Dazai and Shuya, but we'll get towards when the conflict really starts ramping up, that's when we'll be seeing a lot more side characters that actually have quite some big parts to play. And then just a fun fact about how much I do stan Gin is that I was actually in the middle of writing the story. And I was like, do I stan Gin? I was like, she keeps popping up in my stories and I keep giving her like pretty big parts. Am I standing her? And it took, like, I finally got to the end of the story. I'm like, yeah, I think I've been subconsciously standing.
Your Gin standing comes through even in this chapter. You describe Gin like someone who loves Gin.
I didn't know at the time. I was just like, oh yeah, it's Aku's sister. I have to include her.
Okay, so obviously Mori noticed Koyo's bow to Chuya. Mori brought it up. Mori seemed concerned, but in a Mori sort of way. Yeah. He seems like he's treating a lot of this as a bit of a game, a way to see how Dazai is going to react in this pressure cooker of a marriage situation. With Mori and Koyo, as they haven't met yet, they haven't met at all.
They probably like exchanged awkward glances at the wedding.
Yeah.
But since Mori was involved in the talks, no, they didn't have discussions.
Okay, yeah. So they had no discussions. So all of Mori's impressions of Koyo are likely from intelligence and from reports about the opposite group. He seems like he has a very good read on her and a very good eye on her being a threat. Is Dazai feeling the same way currently in the story, or is his confidence a real thing?
Dazai, I would say that Dazai does kind of puff his chest when it comes to talking with Mori, because that's not someone you want to go, you know what, boss, I'm not actually sure if I have this under, like, that's not what you want to tell Mori. So there is a little bit of that, but also, as we've discussed in terms of the conflict and the stalemate between those 2 organizations, Koyu's been in power for, I don't remember the exact number of years, but for a number of years. And they haven't taken this group out yet. So there is this mutual respect in terms of her ability to lead the organization, and also the fact that she's not a Nakahara, and she's the first person to run this organization that's not a Nakahara. That has a lot of weight. Like, there's obviously skill there, there's obviously intelligence there, and they respect that.
And there's obviously a family tie to Chuya as well. There was a line in there about how Chuya's mother had taught him the art of subterfuge, and that Koyo was also involved there. Which leads me to a whole different line of questioning.
Okay.
You know, the slightly feminine male character dresses up as a prostitute, goes undercover is a very common storyline. Yeah. I saw it going that place. I was prepared to be have a little delightful wild ride, but
Uh,
also I was like, okay, this is a direction.
mhm.
Was that bait and switch meant to be a little bit subversive?
Yeah.
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 I felt the snark in there. I felt the tropey snark in there. Tria's breakdown of it was actually really, really interesting, though. Can
Mm.
you refresh for people who may not be either live reading with us or maybe read it some time ago? Can you go through Tria's breakdown of why he did why he did what he did? Because not only was it really interesting, I also felt like it did a lot to show the fact that you are writing a very brainy Chuya.
Yeah. And so there's a couple things I want to touch on in that whole spiel. And the first is in terms of the subterfuge of the trope. This was like my last hurrah in terms of the long Sokaku fic. So it's kind of going through and like checking boxes. Like, what have I not written for this fandom? And I'm going to throw it in here. And what have I done several times? I'm going to switch it up. And so that was one thing that a lot of people asked, like, are you going to put Chuya in a dress? And I had never done it. I'm like, I wrote a lot of one shots. I gotta double check that. I've never done it before this story, and so it's something I wanted to do, but I wanted to do it so that it had a sense of purpose in the plot and that it made sense and it wasn't just we're just gonna stick Chuya in some pretty clothes. And so it has a lot to do with the fact that the Nakahara Kai is really the espionage organization. So they're the people that know how to go undercover. They're the people that are very much trained to do it from birth. And so Dazai was actually the person that suggested them being prostitutes. And Chuya kind of like yes bossed him to the face and he's like, we're not doing that. And so the main reason is because Chuya is familiar with the red light district, which is a Nakahara Kai territory. And so he's like, we can't show up as prostitutes on the street without a pimp. Nobody knows us. Nobody trusts us. They're not going to believe us. The customers aren't going to trust us because we don't have a pimp. The people on the street are going to be suspicious and we're going to stand out because they're going to be like, we don't know these two new girls. Who are they? It's like, also, you can't get information when people are soliciting you. So he's like, prostitution's a dumb cover. And his suggestion, the alternative was being tourists because they could pretend, since they do have non-traditional hair colors for Japanese individuals. This was also another thing of me kind of like, I don't know what the phrase is, kind of like winking at the fandom in terms of, because we get the discourse over and over again.
Oh, yeah,
Chuya being born in France is racist, and then people are like, but he looks like he's white, and then people are like, but this is a Japanese series. Everyone in Japan is Japanese, and and so there's that thing, and it's just like a thing in anime. Like they don't all have black hair and dark eyes. This is fiction. People have hair dye. Like there's a lot of different colors we can get. So also the fact that they were playing tourists and like, yeah, we're not from around here. We look like we could possibly be white or mixed or that sort of thing. We don't have to talk to anyone and we can just whisper to each other because obviously we're tourists. We don't speak Japanese. And so he really was building a good cover to slip in with the crowd and not be noticed.
That's a really, really interesting thing to do. How do you decide when to kind of nudge the fourth wall a little bit?
I just, honestly, I just like putting Easter eggs in my story. Like in this chapter,
I enjoy finding them.
Yeah, well, in this chapter, here's an Easter egg you did not catch because you haven't watched Big Brother, and we've discussed this. Dazai tells Mori that perception is reality, which is a very common Big Brother analysis comment in terms of like, this person wasn't betraying this person, but the house thinks they were, so that's the fact. And so that's where that came from. So I like putting Easter eggs. If you're reading like my Kyoka story, On the Darkest Night, I actually referenced Amelia, my OC from Illustrations of Lying in it. It's just like really brief things. I just like to do it.
Amelia. I love her.
I just like to do it because I know there's a lot of people that have just been reading my stories as I've been writing in the fandom. And there's a lot of people that know my stories like the back of their hand. So I'm like, you're going to notice when I wink at you. And it's just a fun little thing to do.
I have actually experienced that now. I've experienced the amount of people who know your stories. Just because everyone kind of knows Writing from Shadows in terms of Sokoku, which is actually really is very interesting because when I met you, it was before I really read
Mm,
too much fic. I read and wrote for Fiozai,
mm,
but I like did not seek out Sakoku fic. So I came into this with absolutely zero real knowledge of like where that was in
mm,
terms of readership.
mm,
But the more I'm reading it, the more it feels like it feels like sometimes people will take canon characterization and canon setup for granted in fanfic, which can be awesome because you can just jump into something and know what you're reading.
mm,
Um, with where your loyalties lie and with writing an AU versus, you have to do a lot more world building
mm.
in order to make it a cohesive story. You can't rely on what someone else has built because when you change the universal constants, it changes everything about it.
Yeah.
Um, is that something? Can you just talk about Can you talk about your process for building a cohesive AU world? I
Mm,
know about your character
mm,
theory and how you create your people
mm,
and then write them,
mm.
but how do you create the world for them to populate in and make it feel alive?
Okay. Yeah, so world building is my shit. um, I get a lot more questions about characterization, but world building is like for anyone that has not read my Yuri on Ice stuff, which most of you have not, because it's a completely different fandom. I wrote a high fantasy AU, which is really where my writing background comes from. All of my original work is high fantasy, so I like building new places. And one thing I always tell, especially new writers, is there's always like these people going around and like, here's this great world building sheet and you just have to fill this out and you'll have your world put together and write all of this information down. Dump them, throw them in the trash, light them on fire. They're a waste of your time. Don't pay money for them because people do
Oh
charge for
my
those on Etsy as well.
gosh.
Because there's a lot that exists in a world that is not relevant to your story. So, like the example I use when we're talking about high fantasy stories is people are always like, "Oh, you have to know what currency you use." And I'm like, if your characters are not buying anything in this world and they're not worried about money, you don't need to know what currency is in this world. So it's not necessarily important. So what I do is I go from the characters and the plot outward. So I'm writing a Yakuza AU, um, where Dessa and Chuya opposite organizations. Now I build the organization around there. Where's Chuya? He's going to be an advisor. So who is around him and how does this organization structure to fit Chuya into that mold? Who's around Dazai? How is that organization structured? And then we make it a little bit bigger. How do they relate? Why do they relate that way? How do they exist within the city? Make it a little bit bigger. What's going on in the city? Um, are they aware of the Yakuza? Is this a big government thing? Do they know about abilities? Do they not? Make it a little bit bigger. How does the city relate to the country? And you just keep kind of growing with just what's relevant. You don't need to know all the details. You don't need to have all the answers, especially not right away. There's some things that you'll probably get, I don't know, three-quarters of the way into the story and go, oh, I need to figure this out. But if you start just trying to have the world completely created, you're not going to finish the story. You're going to be so focused on the minutia and so focused on the details that you're just not going to be able to get the plot out.
There's probably a lot to be said for organic development
Mm.
as well, creating the structure of your world and then kind of letting the characters and the scenarios sort of lead you through it to
Mm.
new discoveries within it. I mean, personally, that's one of my favorite ways to write, and
Mm.
I've always found that it's very natural to read as opposed to shoehorning in things to make the universe feel full.
Yeah. And that's a good point because there are a lot of AUs where people are like, you need to know everything about this world up front. And you'll see people that have these massive note sections before their stories where they're like, this is the history of the world and this is blah, 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 and this is what's going on. Um, People don't care yet. They don't care. So you need to first get them hooked on the story. Um, and also the characters in the story, unless you're writing someone that just like got fresh off of the boat across like the never ending sea and they've never been to this continent, and they need like a 101 crash course on it, unless you're in that scenario, the characters in the world already exist. They don't need to explain the world to each other. They already know. They don't need to explain it to the reader because they don't know the reader's there. And so you can just sprinkle it in and let it grow kind of organically instead of making it more of a mechanical, like, this is the king, this is the king's country, this is what country is in a war with another country. with my Year on Ice High Fantasy AU, there were 3 different calendar systems. And that wasn't important in the first 6 chapters. And then there was a calendar system, and I was like, this is a calendar system. And then 5 more chapters went by. I'm like, oh, here's a second calendar system. Here's why there's 2 different ones. And so it really is just focus on progressing the story and fill in what's necessary.
All right. So,
and let's pause for reset.
All right, next question. So, during our brief interchanging, this is
resetting the camera?
Yes, that's what we're going with. While we were resetting the camera, we had a small conversation about Chuya. Talk about Chuya's internal monologue when he is unable to say something out loud.
Yeah, Chuya's internal monologue is just completely unfiltered, and every story I write, it's unfiltered, because we know Chuya has words to say, and we know he has a temper, but we also know he doesn't always say everything that's on his mind, because he's definitely not, like, up in Mori's office talking about, the fuck, I'm not doing that. Like, you don't say that to Mori.
Probably not.
No. And so for me, it's really important, especially when we put him in these situations where he has to be, like, perfectly well-mannered and everything. We don't want to lose, like, the fiery, hot-headed Chuya. And so that's what we have, the internal monologue. And that's what a lot of people do, is you sit in this long meeting for no reason, and you're outwardly, like, nodding, like, oh, that's an excellent idea. And in your head, you're like, I wish I was in bed. Why am I here? This is ridiculous. It's just a natural human thing to do. And so when Chuya gets to monologue in his head, he is not softening any blows.
I enjoy the unfiltered nature of his internal monologue and the lack of shame he has around it. There's no Chuya going, maybe I shouldn't call Dazai a fucking prick. Maybe I should think kinder of him. No, he's just like, yeah, fuck that fucking prick. And I respect that.
Me too.
So. I have to ask about the throwaway rat line. There's one line about chasing a rat, and anyone of the Bungo Stray Dogs fandom is going to read way too much into that line, including me. I'm doing it. So I'm going to ask you, straight to your face, is it Fyodor?
To be perfectly honest, I don't remember what exactly that line said. So I don't know what it was referring to. I will say that there were definitely noticeable hints in this chapter in regards to who our main conflict is going to be.
Yeah, I've been chasing my own tail over this chapter for some of the hints. There's a lot that happens in this chapter. Like it was a quick read, and it didn't feel like as much happened as I think actually did because of the breezy nature of it.
Yeah.
But there was a lot in this chapter, and currently we're about to get to see Chuya in more of a work situation. We've seen him kind of off balance, we've seen him uncomfortable, we've seen him pissed off, but we haven't seen Chuya in straight business, and I don't think that Yokohama has in a long time either, because he's been riding a desk.
Yeah.
Talk more about the development of Double Black and the fact that these two are already falling into a rhythm with each other. You've established that they kind of loathe each other as people.
Yeah.
But tactically, Chuya calls for aid, Dazai's there. Dazai isn't second-guessing Chuya. He isn't... If anything, he respects and sees that this is the Nakahara Kai's main route of attack. So yeah, talk more about the development of kind of the split between their personal conflict and the fact that they are already starting to respect each other as operatives.
Yeah, I think it's something that really just comes to reconciling how much they argue and bicker in canon and how well they work together. Because as anyone who's worked in any sort of anywhere setting, Doesn't matter where you're working. You probably had coworkers, and there's usually a coworker that you don't like, but you know how to work with them, and maybe when you get together, you can do really good things. And so these are two men who are not just professionals; they're the top of their class. Um, they're just there's not a lot of people that can really stack up to their skill, their knowledge, and their competency. And even if they don't like each other, they're just skilled enough to be able to look at each other and go like, you have a skill set that I don't have, and we can work together and we can work well. And so really what it is kind of the setting forces them to get past being mad at each other. They're forced together because they're at war with someone they don't know who they're at war with. So a lot of that is the circumstances just forcing them to work together. And then a lot of it is, in a way, this was Dazai kind of feeling Chuya out. Like, what is Chuya like in the field? Can I work with Chuya? How can Chuya handle himself in a meeting? Like when Chuya's like, he set me up to be in this meeting. And the fact that Chuya recognizes that, and the fact that Dazai knows that Chuya recognizes it, is really just them kind of, they're still poking at each other, still feeling each other out. And the more they feel out, the better they can work together.
They're almost sort of developing an unspoken communication already. The understanding that Chuya knew what was going on in the meeting, that he knew that Dazai set him up and was a few steps ahead, the fact that Dazai essentially kind of chased his own tail in order to allow the slight of Chuya choosing different from him in the mission, the fact that he didn't really remark on Chuya not using his suggested disguise. We're seeing a strange amount of trust and openness, but it's making a lot of sense. So that's something that I am, again, very interested to see where their professional relationship goes. And because arguably in canon, there isn't a ton of crossover currently between their professional and their personal selves.
Right.
And they are still able to work together so well. So I'm curious to see if what brings them together in a romantic sense is going to be something other than how well matched they are as Double Black.
Yeah, I will say, just in terms of when I'm writing all of these stories, when I write really any relationship, all of your writing comes down to your personal experiences. And for me, even though I haven't really done much dating, you can't have a partner without trust. And so that's really the big block that we have in this story, is they don't trust each other. And that's something that throughout the story, it's really where my focus is as the writer, is how do they start trusting each other?
All right. As someone who writes a lot of enemies to lovers, it's a really familiar struggle.
Yeah.
Getting them to the point of talking so that they can trust each other is a struggle. Let's see. I'm trying to think about if I have any more questions for you with this chapter. I think that I've rapid fired a ton at you here on both the chapter itself and some interesting characterization things.
I had a question about something. You asked me a question, and I had like a question and response, and then I lost it. So in the future, I'm going to be writing it down. But for now, the episode question: what's on the Rika watch?
What is on Rika watch? Okay, so Rika watch number 1. Mori is still on my Rika watch. Okay. There's something about this dude. There is something so wrong with Mori. Like, more wrong with Mori than is normally wrong with Mori in the Bungo fandom. I think he's in on whatever's going down. I'm not going to put a full-on bet in yet. I need more info. But Mori is on for Rika watch.
Yeah, that's fair.
Number 2 on Rika watch is Koyo Ozaki going to show any of her canon possessiveness over her charges? I'm interested to see what you do with that trait, because it's one we discussed last episode, and we discussed that it might not be present given the change in circumstances. So even if that isn't present, Koyo still, at her foundation, is a very loyal person. That is just a reflection of corrupted loyalty.
Yeah, and that's something that, for people that have just listened to me talk about it or have read the author's commentary, Koyo and Chuya's relationship is it's an interesting snag in the story, in terms of like, okay, he's married off, he's not part of this organization anymore. The boss has been like, yep, you're not my responsibility anymore. But they have a personal relationship, so it's like that little snag is something that I pay attention to throughout the story, and that we'll definitely see more of.
All right. That was Rika Watch number 2. Rika Watch number 3. Let's see. Rika Watch number 3. I'm gonna start counting the emotions Dazai experiences because I want to know how many of a dude had.
Yeah, well, something I'm surprised you didn't bring up is the way the chapter ends. We kind of see Dazai's temper a little bit. And it's not a subtle temper. Like, he really burns hot and he gets very angry. So yeah.
Yep, I'm interested to see what he has beyond anger, I guess. So let's see. We can watch number 4 here. Akusibs.
Yeah.
I love them.
I love them too.
They're excellent. They're great. And I am very, very interested to see what they do. I'm also really interested to see specifically Ryunosuke's loyalties, where those lie.
Yeah.
Right now it's implied that his loyalty to Dazai is above his loyalty to his own sister, which is saying an awful lot. Or at the very least, that he wouldn't hesitate to put his sister into situations at Dazai's orders. But that could also indicate that he's just very, very confident in her competence, so...
Yeah, and so if we want to pause on this for a second, this is something that in canon I actually have an issue with. I pick a bone with the episode where Higuchi goes to save Aku and Gin does nothing. I really pick a bone with that. I have a lot of problems with that because, they're siblings. They're family. I'm like, how do we create, because Gin is not based on a literary author. So Asagiri went, this is Aku, I'm gonna give him a sister.
Yep.
And then we don't really see the familial bond. And as someone that has 2 little brothers, I'm like, even on my days where I haven't talked to them for 2 weeks, if they called me up and said, hi, I need you to pick me up, it's 3:00 in the morning and I don't have anywhere to go, I'm getting in the car.
Yeah.
And that's just the end of the story. And so that's something, when it comes to writing the siblings, I try not to retcon canon. I don't know why. I don't have a reasoning for it. I kind of try to make it work, I guess. And so that's one thing with the siblings is why would Gid not be worried about him? Why is Higuchi the one that's like, no, we need to go save him? Why is Gin, threatening her to not go? Like, why is Gin not involved in this? And my answer, that I know it's not this deep, but this is how I live with it.
It's not the steep counter one.
Yeah, is that first of all, the Aku siblings, everything is predicated on survival.
Mm-hmm.
So if Gin steps out of line to save her brother, she's disposable. So if they're sitting there like, how do we survive the Port Mafia together? We survived whatever their backstory is. I'm big on them, having been on the streets for a long time. The assumption is, I'll handle my business. You trust me to do that. And so that's what comes into my stories as well.
All right. And so I guess Dazai then is slightly, or interesting. I'm dropping that line of thread. You should cut that. You should cut that one. Anyways, Rika Watch number 5.
Okay.
We are on 5, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we're on 5. Oh, man. Rika Watch number 5. This is an obvious one, but I'm taking it. I want to know who the big bad is. I am very interested as to who the enemy here is. I currently am putting my chips in the Fyodor basket, but also I could be forgetting half the cast. That could be happening to me, so...
Yeah, well, this was written firmly before the cannibalism arc was on its roll that it's and the hunting dogs, like, they weren't characters when I started writing this.
I'm retracting the Fyodor chips then.
Fyodor had been introduced. I want to say when I was writing and conceptualizing the story, we'd gotten as far as who's the Pushkin? Is that his
Pushkin?
name?
Yeah.
I feel like he existed at some point while I was writing the story.
So that one's cannibalism. Cannibalism is Pushkin.
I don't know.
I know
canon.
you don't.
I don't know
I'm
which
trying
arc
to
it is.
establish
The one where we
time.
started throwing characters out like they were candy.
Yeah.
That one.
Have some Russians. Have another Russian. Have some more Russians.
Have whatever the hunting dogs were.
Yeah.
I don't know who they are. So they're not in the story.
I'm manga current and I cannot tell you the names of the hunting dogs. I'm so sorry.
But yeah, so kind of, as I've said with this, really, when it comes to trying to predict this story, I think really the big indicator is the fact that I was writing this as my last Sokoku story. And I was trying to one-up myself for the second time. I one-upped myself with my second story. My second story, I finished that, I was like, that's it. I'm never going to top that. And I was like, I kind of want to write another story. And so now I'm having to top that one as well. And so I never want to pull the same trick twice, especially with the people that have read my stories and reread them over and over again. I'm like, you've seen that. You've already tasted that course. So with my first story, what I did was I did a bait and switch where it's like, here comes the guild, just like in canon. Oh, shit, somebody's dead. Never mind, it's not the guild.
Never mind.
And then with my second story, you open the first scene as like, this is our bad guy. So this story is kind of the like, who is it? Who is it? Do we know? Does anyone know? No, maybe.
I have another guess.
Okay.
I'm not sure how I feel about this guess. I'm putting a few chips in the Oda basket.
Okay.
He's either not going to be in this story or he's going to be the big bad. It's his absence is conspicuous to me. Ongo not being there makes sense, both because of his role in canon and also because I know you hate Ongo.
Don't expose me.
I'm sorry. You can bleep that out. It's all censored.
Every time we say Ongo, it's just censored.
Just like feet.
No.
That one's getting bleeped out.
I will say that we're only 4 chapters into the story, and the chapters get longer as they go. So there's a lot of characters that have not been introduced yet that are going to be introduced, and they're going to be fairly important in the story. So just because you haven't seen them doesn't mean they're not coming in. I will say I always write very hard on Oda is just instrumental to Dazai's arc. Even in Don't You Tame Your Demons, where Dazai is the boss of the Perp Mafia, like, Oda is still very important in that story, and I don't bring Oda up for, I think he gets a little cameo like 3 chapters in, but he really doesn't, we don't get our Oda moment until a solid 10 chapters in. But I always bring Oda up. So Oda is in the story. This isn't like everyone that's ever read my things, they know Oda's popping in somewhere, and that was a comment I was getting. They're like, I know Oda's somewhere. Where's Oda?
Like, if he is the big bad, that's going to be beautiful and likely heartbreaking, and I will likely shed several tears over it. I love the Odasaku and Dazai dynamic, in basically every possible way you could see it. The effect that Oda has on Dazai is undeniable. So can we like split this Rika watch into 2 things then? Like the big bad and also Odasaku, who might be a subheader under that, but also might just be his own Oda issue.
Okay, you're making my graphics more complicated.
Oh, I know.
Okay.
We're gonna have to make some more. We'll just go full on whiteboard.
And then I guess my next, I guess you sort of answered that with Oda. I was going to ask you who in the cast that does not come up are you interested to see where they might pop up? Because I will say, out of my 3 stories, I think this one has the most characters from canon in it.
Okay, so aside from Oda, Yuma no Kyosaku. Where's the tiny hat? Where's the tiny hat, Dessa?
That's my murder child.
Where am I? Where's my tiny hat, Dessa?
I can't answer that.
For those of you who can't see, there is in fact a Kyosaku being who I am currently menacing Dessa with. But they're too cute to be particularly menacing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I want to know about the whereabouts of Yuma no Kyosaku and their tiny, tiny hat.
Okay. I'm so mad that I forgot that question. We're gonna play the Jeopardy music now, and I'm gonna look and see if I can remember it.
Oh, fuck yeah, we are.
How long is that music? I think it's 30 seconds. No, you don't have to say it. I'm gonna play
Are you
it.
sure?
Yes, I'm sure. Let's see. Maury, we have. Oh, here's a question. How do you, the why did I just forget how to say it? Gomen.
Komen?
Yes, Gomen. Of the Mitsushima Gumi. How do we pronounce this name? It's is it Uka Shohei? I have it right there.
Oka Shohei.
Oka Shohei. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It's like an O and then you extend the O.
Great.
The long O's are difficult.
Well, that was one of the ones where when I did the earlier mini podcast and I tried to Google how to pronounce it, there wasn't an answer. And I was like, thanks.
The long O's are a little bit like the OU's in that they're strange and subtle, and if you look at them with like it's not an ooh sound.
All right, and then this isn't the question that I had, but I'm just going to ask it to you anyways.
Just
Outside
drink your
of
water.
That's okay.
I'm a disaster.
We'll survive. Outside of Sokoku and the Sibs, who we've mentioned, are there any dynamics that have been established or that have not been established that you're interested in?
Yes, many. Koyo and Chuya, Mori and Dazai, Mori in the world.
Okay.
God, I want to know what that dude's deal is here. Aku and Dazai and Akutagawa. There's not a single scenario where that relationship isn't fascinating to me unless you completely remove it. Everything in there is just, it's so messy. There's so much to untangle. I'm sort of interested to see if Koyo and Dazai interact further. I would be interested to see what the dynamics there would be. And Hirotsu. I like Hirotsu quite a bit in canon. He's like one of those silent faves that I kind of forget about until it's like, oh yeah, Hirotsu's actually pretty great. And in canon, his relationship with Dazai is probably the closest thing to fatherly that Dazai really experiences from anyone. So I'm interested to see how some of that carries over. Also, because we've already established that Hirotsu is someone who, despite being Dazai's subordinate, can talk back to him. So that's another one that I'm super interested in. And I'm also just very, very interested to see Chuya meet and interact with everyone. He's on enemy soil. He, to them, is the enemy. To them, he's a trophy wife. He's kind of a joke. I mean, I believe it was Mori who mentioned a thing about how he should be more neutered. Like, obviously, no one is viewing Chuya kindly here, and I'm very interested to see how that's going to play out.
Yeah.
I hope he makes a friend or two.
Yeah, it really is a tough situation, especially a tough situation Dazai put him in, where it's like, you're going to sit in this meeting with a bunch of people who have lost people to this conflict. Good luck.
That was stone cold.
Yeah.
Everything Dazai's pulled so far, except for the incredibly explosive anger, has been very stone cold, and I appreciate it as a Dazai stan.
Yeah, and I do think once I'm just so excited for you to get to Dazai's backstory. That's gonna I could just imagine that's gonna be like a 2-hour episode. Yeah, because you're gonna have a lot of questions answered there.
I'm so excited. I feel like everyone who's listening to this who has read this fic is probably going, I know these answers. Yeah. Why is she not getting it?
It's like, that's one thing. That's why I enjoy it, and it's why I enjoy when people comment as they're reading through the story and they're like, oh, I want to know what's going to happen here, and it's nice to sit there and go like, oh, I do answer that question, or it's like, oh, you're completely wrong, but I did that on purpose, or that sort of thing. So it's really interesting to see, and that's something that's really fun about fan fiction that people don't get when you're writing novels, because it is, like you said, it's like an episode. So fan fiction for me is closer to a TV show because you're getting it section by section, and so you can discuss, you can have theories. I know people were trying to guess who are mystery Big Bad was, and there were like some discussions of like someone would mention something in the comments and someone else would reply to them and be like, oh no, in this chapter. And so it's really fun to see the speculation and where people's minds go. Because it also makes it so that you can write a better story next time.
I can imagine that as well. Final question.
Okay.
I know it's technically ended question time, but it's a follow-up to what you said there. Do you cave to reader pressure ever, or... I know your answer to this, but I really want you to say.
The answer is no.
Yeah.
Because it's my story.
Yeah.
The only time I really care about anyone's opinion other than my own is if I've been commissioned. So if you paid me to write a story, your opinion is very important. If you did not pay me, I do not care. There is with this story, I actually did write a one-shot because someone asked me to. But they just asked me just in such a nice way, like the way I don't even remember what it was about the comment that I was like, you know what? Yes, I am fulfilling that request. And it's why All Dolled Up exists, if you're familiar with that story. But yeah, I had somebody who told me that I should put All Dolled Up as part of the main verse, and I wrote like a 5-paragraph response to that. I was like, no, absolutely not. Because especially with a story as complex as this, there's a lot going on behind the scenes that the readers don't know about. And so when they're like, I really want this to happen, I really want this to happen, I'm like, you don't know how the story goes. So you don't get a say.
Sit down, shut up, and let me tell the story.
Yes. And I know I've actually had people push back with me about that. I had way back when I was first writing Don't You Ever Tame Your Demons. I released a chapter, and this is the reason why I thought that was going to be my last story. I released a chapter, and I got this long series of messages from someone that I thought was my friend on Tumblr about like, why would you do that? I know you're really important about like the writer's story, but you need to care more about what the reader says. Like, we've put so much energy into the story. I was like, it takes you like 1/10 of the time to read this chapter as it takes me to write it. Sit down, shut up, don't message me again. And since I'm on a soapbox, I would say just for anyone that is writing, because fan fiction is interesting, it is something where we want validation, we do want the interaction from the audience. But when you're caving too much to what people want, especially if it gets in the way of the story you want to tell, it's going to make a worse story. And I honestly think that the best stories we get with fan fiction is when the author is just completely authentic with what they want out of the story. And if what they want out of the story is to add some things from the readers, they add it. There's some things in this story where I want to say after the 6th chapter, after I said, this was me, I'm writing the story, I said, what would you want to see? And I just had people send me messages, and I kept track of it in my notebook, and some of the things that they asked for I put in the story, and some of the things didn't fit, so I didn't put them in there. And so it's your story, you're putting the time and the energy into it, you get the final say.
That seems like a very healthy attitude to take in regards to creator fan engagement.
Yeah, thank you.
I know a lot of people struggle with that, so...
Yeah, we can do a whole episode on it in the future.
We absolutely should, because I have some thoughts there, too.
Okay. Well, with that said, that's all I have. Do you have anything else?
That's all I've got.
All right. Well, thank you so much if you watched all the way through this one. Thank you for watching. We will be back, hopefully, next week.
Fingers crossed. Goodbye.